Welcome everyone to Saving the Climate Through Court. My name is Marika IJskoot. I'm a sustainable lifestyle expert as well as a speaker and presenter, and it's a real honor to be your host this evening. At this very moment, global leaders are gathering in New York for yet another climate summit. After 30 years of talking about climate change, emissions have not been brought down. Moreover, they continue to rise. People are responding to this staggering lack of action by going to court. Because if global leaders fail to act, we take justice into our own hands. Let's have a look at what's happening across the planet.
Though our leaders are silent, let the youth be heard.
Milieudefensie start een klimaatzaak tegen Shell. Wij eisen dat Shell stopt met het veroorzaken van wereldwijde klimaatschade.
Ibisiin guddaan daliil atuwat furannu kanaalee nu qarqaartee nama haasaha wal arganne eegi wannu waan rakhaatu nami rakhaatu jira taatayyo wannu waan harki mirgaa qaboorni baan harki mirgaa qabatanii nami jabeessee cidhanii bile jedhan.
Ongelooflijk pak slaag voor de staat en het had niet beter gekund. Op alle punten hebben we gelijk gekregen.
So that's what's happening all over the world, but who is here? I'm going to do a quick show of hands to see in what kind of company we're in this evening. And please feel free to respond to several identities, because we never just tick one box, right? So who here is a lawyer? Hello, welcome lawyers. This is the National Lawyer Association gathering this evening. That's very interesting. Who is an activist? Could be the same people. Yeah, some of them are the same. Welcome. Who here is not from the Netherlands? Quite a few. Who is even not from Europe? Welcome, everyone. What kind of countries do we have represented here? You can just give me a shout very quickly. The US, Italy, Germany. I didn't get that, sorry. Nepal? Welcome. Uganda. That's amazing. Wow. Welcome everyone for being here. Who here works for a company? Welcome everyone. You can just say it. That's okay. You're very, very welcome too. Who works for an NGO? A few more. Who here would like to file a lawsuit themselves one day? I hope you'll find inspiration this evening. Welcome everyone. This event is organised by Milieudefensie, the Dutch chapter of Friends of the Earth, in cooperation with Bakhuis de Zwijger. We aim to bring together and learn from examples and best practices of cases against companies and governments. How did this civil movement of climate justice evolve, and where will it lead to? I will be interviewing some of the biggest names in climate litigation. We will have a panel that brings together international experts. We will hear about some of the most inspiring cases and, of course, also from representatives of the Global South. Obviously, you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions and be involved. Now, last year, oil and energy multinational Shell was sued over climate change by Milieudefensie. To start us off, please welcome their campaigner and researcher climate justice and energy, Nieuwe de Pater. This is going to be a good evening. Such a generous applause. I love it. So good. Welcome, Nina. Now tell me, why did Milieudefensie choose to go down the legal route and sue to save the climate?
Yeah, well, I think what we saw in this short video clip is that that litigation, that going to court, can be a very effective force for climate action. We had the Urgenda case that we will hear about later on, that already showed that you can win such a court case. But we think that not only governments are to be held responsible for causing climate crisis, because some companies, such as Shell, are responsible for even more CO2 emission than individual single countries. And right now there's no one that forces them to change. And we tried in many different ways. We've been campaigning, we've been taking the streets, we've been talking to Shell, we've been doing blockades, we've been trying all these different kind of methods, and they won't change.
So their emission is bigger than, for instance, what country?
The Netherlands.
There you go.
Yeah. Like their emissions are twice as high as the Netherlands. So we tried so long, and now we decided we cannot wait any longer. We have to force Shell to change and no longer invest all these billions of euros into new fossil fuel projects, into the fossil fuel energy system. We want to make the change happen. We want to make also within the system that we are, but also have these companies take the responsibility.
Yes. So in the video we also saw that Milieudefensie and Urgenda are not the only organizations going down the legal route. So what is your goal for this evening? Why are we here?
Yeah, so Urgenda, Milieudefensie, we are not just two. We are part of a big movement that has been developing in the last couple of years. And what we want to show is that there's so much happening right now that it is possible to sue a company, it's possible to sue a government, it's possible to sue the EU. And there are many different strategies and tactics. And I think it's nice to have all these people together and show you that this is a movement that is here to stay and that is going to make a change.
Nina de Pater, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So that is what we'll be focusing on tonight. Time to introduce our first international guest. Roda Verheijen is a German lawyer and one of the powerhouses of climate litigation. She's currently, she's already coming, you can't even, she's not waiting. She is like on fire. She is currently not just working on one, but on 3 cases.
Yes.
A climate case against the German government. She's representing a Peruvian farmer in a case against coal giant RWE.
Yes.
And also 10 families in a case against the EU.
Yes.
I'm going to ask her all about why and how she's doing it. Roda Verheijen.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
There is no stopping you.
Did I come too early?
No, I loved it.
Sorry.
Perfect timing. It was great. Roda, tell me, because you have such an interesting story. Could you explain to me how you became a lawyer? Because you weren't one to start off with. You were something else before.
Yes, I was a campaigner also in climate change. And I was actually with the FO International. So
Friends of the Earth International.
Friends of the Earth International. When I was about 13, I joined the German chapter of Friends of the Earth.
When you were 13?
Yes. And
12 years ago, apparently.
Yeah, both.
10.
Yeah, quite. Yeah, and I was in London. I was based in London at the time. I was actually, funnily enough, I was a campaigner with Friends of the Earth UK first, and I was actually campaigning in the House of Parliament of all places. Me being German and all, of course, I knew everything about the UK's parliamentary system. But that really told me a lot about the technicalities of actually getting climate change measures off the ground. And then when I was introduced to climate diplomacy, I got very frustrated after a while. And then I decided that I probably would want to go to court at some point.
But you were frustrated, why?
Because things were just very slow. And they're still very slow, of course, but at least now I'm free to take my own hands and my own brain and actually try and defend rights that I think are valid and to be defended. So that's what I've been doing for the past 12 years, I think.
So you educated yourself to become a lawyer. From being a campaigner, you took the initiative to sort of...
Yes, I did study law to begin with, and then I kind of I ran off because I thought I could never be a lawyer. Lawyers are just very conservative and, the kinds of things that are being
not the lawyers
said
here,
about lawyers.
other lawyers.
So,
not you.
Yeah, so I was just a political person, so I thought it would probably be best for me to choose something else. But then I came back and I finished my training, and then I started in the law firm that I still am with now. I'm a partner with that firm now. And I started because I saw a graph in a newspaper which showed 48 planned coal-fired power plants in Germany.
Could you say that again for me?
Yes. When I was still in London, I saw a graph of the amounts of power plants fired by coal in Germany at the time. This was in 2001. And I just felt that it's impossible for me to not do something against that. So I came back and I actually started working on individual projects, individual power plants in Germany.
And that's also what made you go into climate action? Or
yes. I mean, I was a climate campaigner before.
Right? Yeah.
I was, and that, of course, told me also why there should be no further power plants powered by coal in Germany or anywhere else on this planet, essentially.
Yeah. So you went back to Germany and started climate litigation work.
Yes.
Amazing. So maybe you can shortly explain to us what the 3 cases involve that you're currently working on.
Yes, I'd gladly do so. So the first one, the first one is, and we've also seen some images of him. That's my Peruvian client, Saul Luciano Yuya. He lives in Huaraz in Peru, which is a city just down in the Andes, essentially. And what the case is about is the risk of a glacial outward flood, which is threatening the city of Huaraz and also his property. So he came to me through lots of contacts and essentially through the NGO German Watch. And we discussed legal avenues to actually solve his problem, which was essentially that nobody was taking charge of reducing the risk and building a new dam. And at some point, we decided that one of the areas where we could actually work and could make our own decisions rather than transferring decisions to states was to take a case against one of the main polluters, and not to kind of refer blame or to blame. Essentially, that's very important to Saul, but to just make companies take responsibility. That's his issue. He's a spiritual person. He thinks that everybody has a right to do what they do to some extent, but if you do something, you should take responsibility. And this is what the case is about. And of course, because of the north-south divide, it's complicated, but it also has much to it that actually has gripped the imagination of many people. Worldwide, I can probably say. I was actually quite overwhelmed by the reaction to that case.
Well done. Yes. And then there's 2 others, if you can.
Yes.
Very short. I'm sorry it has to be so short, but we can talk about this for the entire evening.
I'm happy to answer questions.
I know.
The second case is the one we also saw one of my clients here, my Kenyan client, the father of a family of many, and I am never quite sure which child is actually his or his wife's. But,
this is a whole other story.
Yeah, it is. We're taking a case against the EU legislator, which is the European Parliament and the Council, for allowing too many emissions into the air until 2030. So it's actually a case based on human rights law, as well as the European treaties, and we're saying that the European legislators are simply not doing enough to protect these people's rights. Yeah. Those are mainly farming families. Some of them are engaged in tourism, and the Kenyan plaintiff and the one from Fiji are actually outside of the EU. The rest of the families are from Germany, France, Italy, Sweden. It's a youth organization of the Sami youth, and Portugal, and Romania.
Can we still join?
No, unfortunately, you can't join anymore because it's a nullification action. Right. It's a very terrible word, but it's actually going against 3 different legal acts that the European legislator has enacted to enforce this allowing too many emissions, which is the 40% target reducing by 2030.
And they're not making it.
They're not doing enough.
No.
They've essentially said we will reduce 40% over 1990, and science and everything else is saying 50 to 60%.
Right. Got it.
And the third case
Yes.
is an enforcement action, which I think is actually comparatively easy because we're going against the German government, again, farmers, 3 farming families and the the German branch of Greenpeace, and we're just saying, please, can you now deliver your 2020 climate target?
Yes.
It's actually just saying, do what you've said for 12 years.
Yes.
And they're not doing it anymore. They're not saying why they're not doing it anymore. They're just talking about the 2030 target now. For some bizarre reason, they are trying to disguise the fact that they've been over-emitting for a very long time in Germany. And the responses that we're getting there is, I don't understand what the government is doing there. But we're actually...
But you're going to find out.
Yeah, we will be actually, we will be able to ask them on the 31st of October in Berlin.
Ah, that's very quick.
Yes.
That's interesting. We'll be following that.
I hope so.
Do you see any similarities between these cases?
What absolutely is in parallel in all of these cases is the IPCC science, because that's in all of them. Just as in Urgenda, it's very important to
Just to make sure everyone knows what that is, could you just...
In the Urgenda case that we will hear about later.
I mean the IPCC, just to make sure
the International Panel on Climate Change, I'm sorry. That's
okay.
the world's scientific body on climate change. It's the one area of environmental issues where we actually have a world body that's recognized and that adopts its reports line by line politically. So when I actually say the IPCC said this, there's no other or better authority for the court. So essentially, I can always just say this is the truth because the IPCC said it. But that, of course, doesn't relieve me from having to argue the concrete bits and pieces that I will need for my own case.
Yes. So that's been proven to be very important.
Yes,
actually,
absolutely.
For all of this.
For all of the cases that I have been following, I think it's a crucial element of not having to explain everything to court to some extent.
Yes, and just have some authority also in what you claim.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And the other thing that is also in parallel, even though one of the cases is against the company and the others are against, countries or, an amount of countries, like in the EU case, is actually about what is your fair share? What do you have to do in your own capacity as a company or as a country? And that's...
Speaking of which, that's interesting because quite some people argue that not just companies and governments are responsible for climate change, but also us as citizens and our consumption patterns are actually as responsible and accountable. What's your view on this? Whose responsibility is it really?
My responsibility is that you can only hold somebody responsible who's responsible for a large share of these emissions to some, because you will have, it's what we call as lawyers the de minimis standard. You have to be to some extent significantly responsible. And as a lawyer also, I would say that each citizen in each country worldwide, be it in the Netherlands or Germany, of course you're personally responsible, but you're not legally responsible. Because there's different legal standards to apply to such, tort or nuisance type provisions. I can explain that. And of course, under human rights law generally, you are not responsible to uphold my human rights unless, in very extreme cases where human rights could also influence the private law matters that would affect you and I, for example.
And as a person?
What do I think?
Yes.
I think policy and politics have to act.
Okay.
We need to be providing the framework in which each of us can properly act. I personally have chosen not to fly anymore as far as possible. I have chosen not to eat too much meat, but everybody can choose that and we would still not solve the world's problems. No. So I think there's a definite reason to actually blame politics very much.
Yes.
And
Do you think there's sometimes too much actually focus being placed on individual responsibility?
I think focusing on individual responsibility is important, but the main responsibility of a person in a democracy is to go and vote. And I think as long as we don't vote for the right people who will actually deliver strong climate policies and targets, I think that's the most important thing you can do as a person in Europe and everywhere else where democracies still work. Unfortunately, that's not all over the world.
True. Just going to leave that hanging for a while. There's a rapid number a rapidly growing number of climate cases at the moment. It seems to be increasing and quite quickly. Do you feel that this is a good thing, that there's more and more climate cases happening?
Personally, I would wish that there was none, because that would mean that politics were actually delivering.
Doing something.
Yes, but of course, as a lawyer, seeing what's out there and what we're seeing with respect to actual emission trends, I think that it is a good thing that climate litigation as a whole is spreading. And it also is natural, because as a lawyer, I don't know how it is in the Netherlands, but me as a German lawyer, I'm actually enshrined in our legal system. I'm there to protect legal rights. And I can see left, right, and center legal rights being affected. So I can see why people are taking these cases to court now. And as I told people the other day, I'm being approached by communities now, by farmers, by people just owning property by the coast. And everybody wants to know what they can do on mitigating climate change, so protecting them, but also on who's going to pay the costs. So I actually think these cases are not going to go away anytime soon.
No. So you must be asked for quite a few. You must be asked for quite a few different cases. People would want, I presume, for you to represent them. And I mean, yes. You can just say yes. That's okay.
But
don't be so hard. I mean, yes. So how do you choose?
How do I choose? I'm one person, and I have a small law firm. I have a couple of young lawyers working for me now, but we have limited capacity. There's many other people around the world that can actually represent, cases in other countries. Most of them are actually represented in this room, probably, or sitting in this room. Yeah, I do choose. That is true. I choose the cases that, in my view, will do the most for all of mankind and for my kids. I don't choose the cases that are just purely about money. That's true.
I believe you. Where do you think or hope even climate litigation will go in the near future? Where is it heading?
I think it will be more focused on corporate responsibility. As we were just seeing in the Shell case, the whole case is about a corporation having a duty in its own right, regardless of what the country of origin does or doesn't do. I think those cases will be developed in other areas of the world, just simply because that's what we have to do as an answer to globalization and the decreasing space of states to actually politically regulate behavior. And I do think that there will be very few countries where there will be no climate protection, human rights kinds of cases in the near future, if we don't see massive action from policymakers.
Yes, some real responsibility taken.
But of course, that's not necessarily a good thing for the world, as I said before. I wish
because it
there
means
were none.
Yeah, it's still necessary. Will we also be suing individuals, you think, in the near future?
I can say that
Company leaders?
we have investigated whether or not directors' duties or the duty of care that's enshrined in corporate law could actually lead to a case. I haven't taken one. I don't know what's in the heads of other people. I would not shy away from it, because I do think there's individuals in the corporate world that really do not care, and that's not a good thing. And if that's a legal matter, I will consider it. Yeah.
What would be your advice to people here in this room who would be, considering any type of actions? Is there anything you would like for them to walk away with this evening?
I think if you're in a position to donate, you should donate to cases around the world. There's cases in the south and in the north that really do need funding, not just for lawyers like me. We do a lot of the work pro bono anyway, but because of all the effort that's involved in these cases. And I would advise anybody who's not from the Netherlands, because there's so much happening already here in the Netherlands, to see whether there's a need in your own country on a national level. And as we've seen, you can take complaints with just a couple of kids and Greta and hit mainline news. That's maybe what we need. Yes.
Roda Verheijen. I can imagine you may have some questions for this amazing lawyer and so much more. Please show me your hand if you do. If it's your turn, a microphone will come your way, and please then also state your name and possibly your organization. Please also, before you ask your question, make sure it actually is one. Okay. Yes. I'm going to come a bit forward because maybe you want to join me because then I can see the hands a bit better because it's slightly dark. I am going to go from this side to that side. I see one. Could you? Oh, there's only one here. There's more and more. Could you possibly remember your number? Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to stop it there for now. I'm going to stand next to you.
Hi, I'm Michiel Nanninga. I work for Natuur Milieu. And my question is regarding the second case. I was wondering why you filed a lawsuit against the European Parliament and European Council and not the European Commission, for example, for not providing sufficient regulation.
That answer is very formalistically answered very quickly because the legislator in Europe is the Parliament and the Council and not the Commission. That might change if the European structure changes, but so far we can't really make the Commission responsible for making not proper proposals, if I may say so.
Thank you for your question. That's interesting. Laurie.
Yes, Laurie from Friends of the Earth Netherlands. Rhoda, you've been working on these cases for a while now. And even though you don't have any final decisions or final rulings in these cases, but have you had some successes? And what were your biggest successes in these cases so far?
Thanks.
Yes, I can answer that question. On the 13th of November 2017, I was sitting in a law court in the High Court, Civil Law High Court in Hamm, which was on appeal, my RWE case with Saul beside me, and I was listening for 6 hours of the court reading out their primary opinion of the case. I was so nervous that my nails were basically bitten to bits, and I was just standing there going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And at the final stages, I actually realized that they were stating not just that they followed me, but they followed me on each individual point, and that there is climate responsibility for large emitters. And now we're in the evidentiary phase, which of course is nitty-gritty and very difficult, but the kind of verdict still stands that you can be made responsible for emitting large amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere, and you can be made to pay parts of the recovery costs or the protection costs. And I still think that's an incredible victory, and I would love for people to talk about this more, but because we haven't finally won the case, there is a lot of discussion about whether or not this will actually stand and the rest of it. But for me, I went outside and called my best friend, who I, years and years ago founded a network of lawyers with, Peter Roderick, who lives in London. We founded the Climate Justice Program in 2001. I called him and I said, I can just retire now. Essentially, that's what I said.
Luckily, you didn't.
And that's what I felt at the time, because it was such a huge win.
But it must be hard, though, because some of these cases can take years and years, like up to 15 years maybe.
Yes.
And then it's quite hard to actually really celebrate and showcase the victories that you sort of had along the way, because people still wait for that sort of end verdict. And then that can be really hard to see, I think, keep the attention as well.
Well, I mean, it depends on whose attention, because especially the RWE case and Saul and his family have kept the public eye to a huge extent. I mean, we've had articles in each continent, in almost every country on this case now, because of the way it portrays the difficulties between North emitting and problems in the South so well, I think. So in that regard, the attention has been kept up. But of course, yes, the time elapsing is difficult on the plaintiff
Yeah.
Not so much on me because it's my job and I'm used to it, and I have, road projects that take 10 years as well.
And lots of patience.
I'm not actually a very patient
No, it must be
person.
horrible when you go out of working for an NGO because you're frustrated. Then this must be hard sometimes as well.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
I can't change the way the legal system works, I think.
Maybe one day. Who knows? I'm going to go to question number 3, if that's okay. It's over there. Yeah. He's not going to give you the microphone. That's my fault. I told him not to.
Okay. Hi. Hello? You hear me? Oh, yeah. Hey, I'm Pia, and I'm more from the business side. I'm pretty new to the topic, so maybe my question is a little basic. But the question goes about the first case, and you said you're suing the biggest polluter, and I was wondering, how do you know that this corporation is the biggest polluter? I was thinking probably in Europe you have a system in place to report certain figures. How do you know that these figures are actually true? And is Peru a country where you actually have to report it? Or how do you know that this is the biggest polluter of your client?
Yeah.
Where do you get the data from?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the cases, emissions originating in Germany and the damage or the impact, so the glacial melting is in Peru. So we're only talking about emissions that are generated by RWE or its predecessors in Germany. And we have databases, yes, now in Europe for these kinds of emissions, but only since 2003, since the European Trading Directive came into force. So for all the time before that, we don't actually have official figures. And that's why in 2002, we commissioned scientific work to actually look at corporate emissions on a large scale, statistical data, that is generated mostly through extraction data, so statistical evidence. And there's now a peer-reviewed work that people call the carbon major study. And that's where you can find the 50 or 100 largest emitters around the world. And one of them is RWE, and RWE is still the largest point emitter in Europe, in the whole of Europe, and that's because it operates so many coal-fired power plants. But yes, the data is very disputed, also in my case. I mean, RWE would not recognize this study as valid, but they would also not deliver us any other data. So that's where we stand currently. But the corporate cases, including the Shell case, do rely on this data and on the statistical evidence that's behind it.
And it's always global data, so it's not the company in Peru, but literally you look at the whole world.
The question if it's global data. I'm going to have to stop you here because we've got so many more questions. But if it's global data,
it's company-related data. So which emissions can be traced back or attributed to a company? It could be the Kuwait Energy Company, which is a state company, or RWE or Shell, or Exxon, which is sued in the US on the basis of the same data. Sorry.
Question number 4.
Yes, hi, my name is Sunny Bergman. I'm an independent filmmaker and an activist. And I was just wondering, when you were talking about the biggest responsibility, in your opinion, lies with the policymakers and politicians, the case you're doing with the first case you're talking about, you're suing the biggest emitters. What's the
emitters?
word?
Yeah.
Yes, emitters. So wouldn't as much responsibility lie with the 100 biggest emitters in the world?
The way the first, yes, thank you for the question. I think it's important to note that the cases are very different. The RWE case that I'm bringing on behalf of Saul Lozano Yuya in Peru is about taking one emitter and asking him to pay part of the costs that are necessary to protect him and the city of Huaraz. So it's about past and ongoing emissions, but it's not about the future, to some extent, at least. This is different from the Shell case. But the main answer to your question, where is the responsibility, is that as long as nobody takes the responsibility, everybody, to some extent, that is a large emitter, is responsible. And that's what came out of the first opinion of the court in Hamm, because that's what they said. As long as there's no legal instrument actually regulating the issue of climate damage, I mean, they said this in open court. As long as there's no law or international agreement that actually gives your client another remedy it will have to be the largest emitters that actually make money from burning coal. So this is the kind of discussion that's actually been taking place in court, and that's astonishing. You know, you take it to a very objective level. Courts in Germany are very impartial and objective and kind of facts, right? But that's right. As long as there is no other solution, the law stands and the law is there. I'm using existing law. I'm not making up the law.
But in your opinion, does most of the responsibility lie with the corporates or with the policymakers?
I think that our future lies with democracies, and therefore I believe that the politics have to actually make the hard choices that need to be made. But I think those companies in the world that have made it their business model to burn coal and oil, etc., should take responsibility for their past behavior. Yes, absolutely. And that's two different items, I think, that can go in parallel and that are not competitive, also not legally.
Thank you very much. Last question.
Good afternoon. I'm Omar. I'm working with the European Space Agency at the moment. My question was more into...
Want to step forward a bit?
Yeah,
Count a bit dark, and that's dark at the end. Yes.
No, my question was more so when it comes to actually receiving the verdicts, and granted the verdicts are positive, have you given any thought into how to ensure that they're actually enforced? Because very often it of becomes more of a slap on the wrist, and especially if it's these bigger corporate conglomerates where they can easily pay that out of their back pocket. Obviously there's power in also creating legal precedents, especially for, let's say, general individuals that also want to bring these issues, but how do we take it further?
Thank you, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Enforcement is very important. Yeah. If we receive a positive verdict in the RWE case, I'm positive that we will also actually not receive any money until the appeal has been launched. Because if we win, RWE will go to appeal. So it will be a long time until we actually have to talk about enforcement. But yes, you're right. If we do win, the first thing I will do is write letters to all of the other 50 major emitters, asking them to please, come up with their fair share. That's already agreed with my client. And of course, that's natural because what we're asking for is a very small amount of money on this very concrete case.
How much?
It's not even 20,000 euro.
Oh.
Which they could, of course, have paid me a long time ago. Their lawyers' fees will be skyrocketing completely beyond that, obviously. But on the other cases, that's a very important question because we're in an age where it is somehow doable to ignore court verdicts. We've seen that around Europe on air pollution. We're seeing this in Europe and the South on many other environmental cases. So it is important to look at what we can do, and we have a strategy on what we can do afterwards. But in this particular case, in Germany, for example, if we actually convince the judge that we have standing to be in the court of law, if we actually have a way of relying on this law that we are relying on, which is not actually a formal law, but a rule, if our human rights or my client's human rights are affected by it, so if they actually then agree with me and ask the government to fulfill the 2020 target, there will be a huge uproar in Germany because we're now in 2019. They will only have very limited time to actually fulfill this. And we're actually asking for 685 million tons of carbon to be reduced essentially immediately. So that would be a difficult task. And what normally happens in these cases is that the defendants comply with a verdict like that by releasing a statement of how to comply to the court. And if that doesn't satisfy, the European Court of Justice has just been in closed chambers talking about whether or not a minister can go to jail for not complying with a verdict. And I don't know what's going to happen with that, but it's a very important question, and we have to make sure that we talk about this because in climate litigation, everything is kind of so difficult that you don't think about these things, but you have to.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for your interesting questions, and thank you, Roda Verheijen, for your amazing work. Roda Verheijen, everyone. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now, do we own nature? And does our environment have social and economic rights, for instance? Davina Mizidian is a lawyer and researcher at the University of Utrecht, and she specializes, amongst many other things, in the right of nature that can't defend itself, as opposed to us humans who fight for our future on this planet. This might remind some of you of the work of, for instance, the late Polly Higgins and others who make the sort of take on this different angle and approach of nature's right. To hear about her fascinating work in combining climate and human rights, please welcome Davina Mizidian. Where you come from? There you are.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see everyone here for this interesting topic, and also to see that so many people have such a good view on a hopeful future. So today I want to discuss with you a couple of things, among them the role of law, right? Because law is what basically sets out the values that we have. It sets out the values that we have as a society, and it also makes sure that we take into account concepts such as ownership, accountability, and what we're going to do with this climate and how we're going to tackle it. So the law in many ways so far has been sort of complicit in environmental degradation. And it is basically the task of us as lawyers, as scholars, and as activists to try to push the boundaries of rights and try to see how we can use it in an effective way to actually tackle climate change. So today I'm going to talk to you about a few examples, a few initiatives that actually try to help us reimagine law and try to see how we can find new ways to tackle climate change and environmental degradation. So the first example I want to share with you is the one from the Atrato River in Colombia. So in 2015, a group of local communities went to court and they fought over the illegal mining around the river. They wanted to tackle this mining because it affected their communities, and so they went to the highest court in Colombia. And this resulted in a very remarkable case. The final conclusion was that in order to effectively protect the community around the river, you actually had to make sure that the biodiversity was conserved. So in that case, the court actually said that the river in itself has rights to be managed well, to be restored, and to be maintained. And in that sense, this river was one of the first rivers that actually was granted rights. Now, even a few years later, they went further on, actually in 2019, in July, because a group of 25 young plaintiffs, called themselves the Future Generations, went to court again, and they actually argued that in order for them to be able to live in the future, that the Amazon of Colombia had to be protected. So they went to court, and there was finally found that because of deforestation, because of the positive effect that the forest has on combating climate change, the Amazon had to be protected. And therefore, the Amazon in itself was also granted rights. The same rights as the river, to be maintained, to be restored, and to be conserved. So in that sense, these two cases show that law can be taken to another level, can be taken to protect also nature and actually granting rights to nature itself. What is interesting about this case is that it does take sort of a human perspective in the sense that that the river and the forest has to be protected because humans need to be protected. But you can also take another perspective, and that is the perspective of the Whanganui River in New Zealand. Because also in this case, river rights were given to a river. And what they did is that they tried to look for approximation in law. So what can we find in law that we can use to kind of translate the worldview of the Maori people, the Whanganui iwi, connected to the river? And they said, okay, we're going to use this concept of legal personhood. We already know legal personhood connected to humans. We already know it connected to companies, for instance. But now let's see if we can also tie it to a river. And in that sense, they started to recognize or make a law that actually recognized the rights of the Whanganui iwi and the Whanganui River as a legal person, as having legal personhood. It was not only for this river that it was recognized, but also for a mountain and for a nature reserve connected to this river. So what is very interesting about this case, and different from the Colombia case, is that the rights of this river are actually connected to it being an independent whole within nature. So in that sense, this river had rights of its own, not connected to humans. It was really seen as an independent entity in and of itself. Because we wanted to protect the rights of this river, 2 guardians were assigned to this river. One basically elected by the government, the other one elected by the Maori iwi, and together they would be seen as the guardians of the river and protecting the interests that the river has. So in this sense, these are 2 examples of nature actually being granted rights, specific rights for nature, specific rights for rivers and for forest. And this can help us actually give standing to nature in courts. So right now, we're not so sure how this will all pan out, but it is a new avenue that we're going on, and that we will try to see if this will be an effective way of protecting nature, but also trying to combat climate change. There are also other avenues that can be taken, but within the European system and also within other countries, you can see that rights of rivers and the like are actually gaining ground. So also within the US, we now see that a lake has been giving legal personhood. And we also see that in a Dutch context, there are different initiatives around the Waddenzee and the Noordzee, where they're now also trying to see if we can recognize their rights and actually try to get that into our constitution. But besides these rights for rivers, we can also look at other initiatives that might be able to help us tackle climate change. So some of the arguments can also be connected to pollution. And one of the areas that is gaining ground is actually the combat of air pollution. So this is one case in the UK where a young girl had died as a result of air pollution. She had developed asthma that she didn't have before she was living in a very polluted area. And now they're trying to argue that this air pollution basically caused her death. But this is one of the first cases where this will be done. And again, you can see that the law is being pushed in certain ways that it hadn't before, because we don't really have a right to clean air. And we're trying to now argue that if people are developing asthma and are developing different illnesses because of air pollution, we need to be able to tackle that according to the law. Another development that we are seeing is ecocide, which was just already mentioned. The late Polly Higgins is the one who was basically a pioneer of this issue. And she wanted to include ecocide as one of the 5 crimes or international crimes, meaning that if there is someone or a company or another party that is actually degrading the environment to such a great extent that they will be able to be brought before the ICC, the International Criminal Court. Now, unfortunately, she has recently passed away, but still this is going onwards, and they are still arguing to make sure that ecocide is part of crimes against humanity. So in that sense, I've tried to give an overview of some of the developments that are going on and that will hopefully help us to tackle climate change in a constructive and a legal way. For us as lawyers, it's very interesting to see these developments because we know that law can be used as an instrument, but we therefore hope that it also will be effective. Thank you very much.
You can keep the microphone, you can keep it. Davina Lizidian, thank you very much. Thanks so much. That is such an interesting, different perspective on these possibilities. We've got time for about 1 or 2 questions, 5 minutes. So first comes, first serve. You know the drill by now. Raise hand, microphone, name, organization, a real question. Okay, first comes first. Let's see. Now I've scared everyone away. I'm going to ask you a question. No one has a question about this. There's one up front here. Were you half raising your hand? That's 1, 2. Thank you.
Just briefly, how would you argue that the atmosphere has legal personality?
It's Roda Verheijen asking the question. No, it's okay.
For the atmosphere to have legal personhood, well, that is actually, that would be very much be a new development. What we are now trying to do is the air actually having sort of our requirements for the quality, etc., but it's not being argued yet from a legal personhood perspective. I think one of the challenges would be that the air is different than a river, not able to be managed in a certain manner. So I think that would be a very challenging question. So I would have to think about that one.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear this, but...
Could you tell us who you are, please?
Yes, my name is Tim. I'm a student. I'm a master's student in International Development Studies and Philosophy, so it's a good combination.
It's a good combination.
Yeah,
yes,
it's a very good
excellent.
combination. Yes. You remain critical and practical at the same time, so what more can you wish for? As I was saying, so the personhood strategy is also being applied for certain types of animals. I don't know if you're aware of the Grade A project, where they try to use this category of personhood to make non-human animals. Also, so in which cases is it similar to that strategy? And given the difficulties that are already there, yeah, it just seems such a huge leap to having rivers and mountains acquiring a right which we have so much trouble. Even our closest animal relatives, the chimpanzees, for example. So,
thank you very much.
True, it is very much a challenge. It's very much also an experiment in a certain way. So what I would say is that let me start off first by your question about the non-human animals. So in that sense, what they're also trying to do with that is trying to get them also rights to the area that they live in. But what's interesting is that the rights of nature and the rights of animals so far have been 2 separate fields, which you really wouldn't expect. What is going on with the rights of nature is that they're also trying to connect laws to it. So for instance, if you're talking about restoration, what does it mean? What does it mean for the water quality? So there's still some sort of a human perspective on it, that we still sort of interpret it from a human perspective, saying, okay, we need certain standards and we're still making sure that the river meets it. What is different from the previous approaches is that it's recognizing the river as being of and in itself, being independent, also have an intrinsic value. So it's also the spiritual connection that, for instance, the Maori community has with it. And therefore, the river will also have rights to stand in court. So hopefully we will be able to use it in a way to balance interest. Because first it was only recognized as being useful to humans and how we use it. And now we're trying to see if we can change that perspective and also change our relationship with the river.
Thank you so much and best of luck with your inspiring and amazing work. Davina Misejan, thank you so much. Time to dive a bit deeper into the do's and don'ts of climate litigation, if you like, and hear from some experienced experts. Please welcome politician, member of the European Parliament and international environmental justice specialist, Marie Toussaint. Bienvenue. Have a seat. Climate accountability lawyer at Client Earth, the NGO that uses the law to protect our planet, Sam Hunter-Jones. Welcome. And lawyer and legal counsel at sustainability foundation Urgenda, and part of the team that won the case against the Dutch government last year, Dennis van Berkel. Welcome. just give these around. Grab some water if you feel like it. Dennis, can you reach that one? Perfect. Welcome and thanks so much for joining us. That is amazing. I would like to start off with asking all three of you to share with us the 3 most important things that we all need to know about you and your work. You've all got 1 minute maximum, and I'm going to start off with Marie. Go.
That's quite a challenge, isn't it? Hi everyone, thank you for welcoming me. So in 20 seconds I try.
You've got 60. I'm not that terrible.
Seconds, no, that's fine. No, the first thing I would like to say is exactly what we've been saying both with Rhoda and Delphine, is that it? That we have to really integrate that human rights and the planet, the states of our planet are linked. And it's not only about how to live in this planet, it's also how to live here with dignity and the equal chance to live in. So that's also what I'm doing, and what Notre Affaire à tous in France is doing as well, is to try to set up this thing that if the planet doesn't have a dignity, then the humanity doesn't have a dignity. If the planet is not livable, then there is no equality that is possible on Earth. The second thing that I would say is, in France, we have this real, law is called droit, and the rights that we have are called droit. And what we say also is that the law is not only a tool to change society, it's not only the rules that we have to live together, it's also a philosophy and the way we want to go. So everything that we do with litigation or with lobbying on the law to change it is to be able to set up a new philosophy where we could live in the respect of the planetary boundaries, but also in the respect of all the living, the human beings, but also the rivers, but also the ecosystem, but also the air. And the last things that I want to say is that with l'affaire du siècle, we've raised so much support in France, and it's really important that we stand together. And if we begin together, when we launched l'affaire du siècle, we went to look for NGOs, for stars, for web influencers, for many citizens.
We'll be talking about this in a while, so don't give it all away.
That's the last thing that I want to say that is really important, is that when we stand together and we launch something and we believe in it and we want to go really far with this, then we can really manage great, great, great things, and that's the hope that I have for us also here tonight.
Merci beaucoup. Sam, 3 things we need to know about you and your work.
Yeah, so I would just echo everything that Marie said.
Oh, that's easy. Okay.
But if it's helpful, I'll talk about 3 areas of work that we're focusing on that I think are really important.
Is that about you and your work? Then yes,
great.
Absolutely.
So the first area is human rights that we've already spoken a lot about. And that's one area that we're looking at, particularly at the international level. So we're acting for 8 Torres Strait Islanders that have brought a complaint against Australia at the UN Human Rights Committee level recently and that case focuses on their cultural ties to their land and sea that have lasted for millennia, and that the risk of them being displaced due to sea level rise and climate change.
That was half of your time, I'm afraid.
So quickly, also work a lot on financial and corporate law. So using financial corporate law arguments to emphasize how many of the carbon-intensive investments that are made by big corporate entities make no economic sense, as well as being really bad for the planet. And then finally, we also work broadly on government policy and infrastructure planning. And that's something that we need to increasingly look at with urgency, because what we're building now will lock us into emissions over the coming decades. And so if we want to be zero carbon or net zero by 2050, we need to be doing decision making now that's consistent with that.
Cheers. Dennis, the 3 things we need to know about you and your work.
I'll start with myself. I didn't really know anything about climate change when I was studying. I don't think I actually mentioned the word once during my whole law school. I was a corporate lawyer, and at a certain point I got very worried about the climate, and it struck me that it was the biggest injustice that is conceivable, something that is done by the rich and the poor are suffering. So I quit my job, and I decided that I wanted to work in climate change, and was very fortunate to meet a very inspiring lawyer, Roger Cox at the time, on a boat. we can go into that story if you like. But
are you still here, Roger? Because can we talk about that story? He was here before. Yes, there you are. We will talk about that at the bar.
And that conversation led to me work on the case, which I've done since late 2013. We won the case against the Dutch government.
This was your entire minute. So
I'm sorry.
That's okay. But
so we won
if you want to make more
2015.
points, then you have to be quite quick.
And at the moment when we won, there was such an enormous interest from all around the world in doing these cases in other places. So we decided to set up a network to do just that, to support those that need the support to actually launch these cases.
Thank you very much. And also for that sort of teaser of another story in your head somewhere. We will get it out. Okay, Marie, so you organised a court case with your NGO, you were already referring to it just now, where you managed to get 2 million people to support you. That is a massive amount, 2 million people. How did you manage to do that? We all need to know this.
So it's 2,200,000 and 25. So
I stand corrected.
I just want to be precise.
Yes, no, I agree with you. Yes, it's very important.
Well, the first thing is we didn't do it by ourselves. I mean, we already had the Urgenda case, which made a lot. But also we organized a conference a bit like this in Paris 3 years ago, I believe, or maybe 2 years ago, where we welcomed Denis. With the lawyers, but also the people who did the campaign. And we already had 250 people coming here, and nobody talked at the time about climate litigation, but we really did give news to the press also to feed them with what is climate litigation. We went to see a lot of professors, of law professors, to tell them about that. We went to the radio, we did a lot of communications about what it is everywhere around. And then we launched a challenge to the government saying, hey, our law is not adapted to the climate emergency. So what will you do? Will you move? And they said, okay, we might change the constitution. Maybe I'll get back on that a bit later. But and finally they didn't. So we went to see all the NGO world and we said, hey guys, this is something we can all do together. It doesn't have to be ours, but it can be our common project. And at the beginning, they were not coming, and then we had this catastrophic summer last year. And when we came back from this summer, we had set up a group of journalists who wanted to investigate on personal, individual climate change cases, like to show how much the poorest are impacted by climate change. So we had this group supporting us, and then the NGOs began to come slowly and slowly. And we had a group of web influencers that gathered together saying we want to deal with climate change. And they asked us to go and teach them about climate change. So we had all these people gathering together. And we felt it was the moment to go. So we went together and we said, okay, we're a collective putting this request. We had worked a lot on the content. And then we launched it at the time of the COP last year, and it got boom. It went boom. We had 1 million in 1 day.
For people who don't know what COP is, maybe you can...
The COP, the Conference of the Parties, which is the place where all the member states of the United Nations talk about climate change. So it was at the moment, so there was a focus on climate. But I have to say as well, we had this story about the collective actions everywhere around the world that could really put an end to climate change. So the fact that we were all together around the planet was really a big strength. And we also had very particular moments in France with the Yellow Vest movement and really an anger against the government that really helped. And it was hard work, but it was also the situation that really gathered everyone together to pull this request.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's very inspiring. Talking about inspiring, Sam, Client Earth is also taking legal action against fossil fuel companies, such as here's happening with Shell, but as a shareholder. So what does that involve?
Yeah, so that involves becoming a shareholder as the organisation.
Clearly, yes.
So buying shares. And so we did that recently in relation to a planned coal-fired power station in Poland, which was going to invest effectively €1 billion in a project that was going to lose money over the lifetime of the asset. And so we looked at the rising carbon prices, so the regulatory prices paid for emissions, and also the lowering cost of renewables, and argued that the project was not economically viable and in the best interests of shareholders as a result. So using the existing economic and financial law to demonstrate the economic problems as well as the environmental problems of these kinds of investments.
Has that worked so far already?
So we won that case in August.
Congratulations.
And it may be appealed, but we'll see. But yeah, it's a really good start, and I think it's important to show that the economic arguments are just as powerful often as the others, and there are many reasons why we shouldn't be making these investments.
So that's then probably also the advantage for going this route to being a shareholder, that you can use those different arguments to show that it's
absolutely,
not viable.
absolutely,
Yes.
It's one of the many strategies we need to be.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, thank you. Dennis, the Urgenda case is world famous. That's amazing. Many people know of it and have also used it in different ways to sort of further their own cases. What would your biggest takeaways or your biggest lessons be till now? Because it's not done, of course.
Well, there are loads of lessons. I think they're twofold. So one is the enormous impact that such a case can have.
Yeah.
It's not just that it's being picked up around the world, but it really also transformed the political discourse here in the Netherlands. It was sort of at the core of getting climate change on the political agenda. So it was not just the case, and it was not just to force the government to do this, but it also provided a platform for other groups that wanted to propose what their climate solutions were, for politicians to actually propose a climate act, etc., etc. And I remember, prior to us winning, half a year before that we won the case, climate change was really not on the political agenda. It was really difficult to get any debate in Parliament on the topic, and the leader of the biggest party in Parliament actually refused to acknowledge that humans were causing climate change. And that was December of 2014. That was half a year before we won. And now that's inconceivable.
That was the VVD then?
Yeah. That was our... he then became Minister of Foreign Affairs for not a very long time, but that was not very...
You can just say the name.
Albe Zijlstra, yeah. So he... so that's the one thing. It can be a huge catalyst for change. Yes. And on the other hand, we should also realize that it's not the silver bullet. Climate litigation is not going to solve the whole problem. It's one very powerful tool. It can be a powerful sword, but you need many more things in place for the actual real action to take place that we need. And one of the reasons for that is that whatever we are going to achieve with regards to these climate cases against the states is probably the absolute minimum. That's what we got in the Urgenda case. The 25% reduction order that we got, that's not enough. No. We know that's not enough. But that's what we could argue in court. There's really a rock bottom. And all across the world, and that's why you'll see more and more of these cases, we're reaching the rock bottom. And that's where we can come in with our swords, our legal swords, and say, listen, this is not working. Yeah. You really have to stay above that bare minimum. But then it's up for the public at large to stand behind the case so that it gets implemented, because a judge can only do so much. A judge doesn't have its own army. We need to keep our politicians to do what they should be doing, and that's to respect the rule of law, but also to then use that case as a jumping board to really get the real action that we need. And it's probably much faster than we can achieve with these cases. Yeah. These cases are a way to break the system open, but they are not going to be the sole answer.
No, thank you. Thank you for that insight. There's a couple of people here who are thinking of maybe starting their own cases. So let's give them a hand, right? Give them some tips about how you go about building climate court cases. What are the most important lessons, tips and tricks, tips? What can we give them?
I don't want to scare anyone, but...
Please, no.
It's a lot of work.
So you need stamina, you need time, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What
so
else?
you need, it really, I mean, in each of these cases, especially the cases that have been successful, and also in our case, our lawyers really, they stopped their whole practice. They just lived for this case.
Yeah.
This was the most important thing in their lives. They lived for it. We did nothing else but that. And that came with sacrifices.
Yeah.
But that's what they believed they needed to do. And that has been a huge part of the eventual success.
Yeah.
So it's not an easy thing to do.
No.
And look for some friends, because you're going to need some support.
Some other insights.
Right. So I think you need to be really first of all have a vision of the change you want to see. Right. So you want to approach this strategically, but also you have to be opportunistic and you have to be nimble and able to react to circumstances. So
flexible.
You need to be able to spot the projects that are coming that you want to challenge. You want to be able to see where the evidence is going in terms of the evidence you're going to rely on. But also, you want to think through the impact of your case more widely. So what is this legal action going to achieve? How is it contributing towards the change you want to see? And that's quite complicated, and it's maybe outside the comfort zone traditionally of lawyers. But it's really important because you want to have as much impact for all the slaving away that you're doing. You want to have as much impact as possible.
And also no adverse impact. I'd say that there's something that can come out of it that's actually not helping.
Exactly, yeah.
That would be quite important, I reckon. Anything to add?
Maybe, but they have said the main points. I mean, be ready to invest a lot of time and energy, design your strategy and be sure of your goals. What I would say as well is be inventive, because I'm not sure the bad effects of those cases is certain, because it's so new that anyhow we have to try, and we have to try a lot, and we have to keep trying. So that's also something. We have to be inventive and long-lasting in front of the effort. And it's also really good and really important to talk with other people, like Rhoda, like Dennis, like the guys from Client Roof, because all of us, we have more ideas about how to go forward.
Yes. So let's get some more of your knowledge and give people the opportunity to ask you some questions. You know the drill by now. Hand, microphone, name, question. Let's see a show of hands. Who has interest? I'm going to go from that way. I see number 1. Will you please remember your number? 2, 3. Is that it for now? Yes. Thank you. It's nicely spread. Rick, you can run around quite nicely. It's good.
My name is Jan Juffermans. I'm working for the Platform for a Fair and Green Economy. And we are starting a new case combining climate change and the food question, land grabbing and so on. And we ask for a smaller footprint in the rich countries. We call it the statement, a fairer share is a human right. So we see 50 years of not working on poverty and richness. And we see the possibilities through the International Court of Justice. And I have a question, if anyone here has some experience. We have from the Peace Palace the advice to go for an advisory opinion on the statement, a fairer share is a human right. We have the calculation system in the footprint model, and we are now looking for 2 countries to put this on the table of the United Nations General Assembly. That is the advice we got from some persons to go
Could you
for...
formulate your question, please?
Yes, well, the question is, anyone who can help to find the best way to come on the table of the United Nations General Assembly. So it can be through 2 countries, but also to one of the bodies of United Nations.
Okay, so you're looking for advice on how to get that on the table.
I go for advice, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone here? It's very specific, it might be hard, but if there's an idea that you can get from the top of your head, that would be useful. Or someone else. Otherwise, no, Sam, go for it, try it.
The challenge here is obviously that you need to have states that are willing to sponsor your initiative. So that's the obstacle, and it's difficult to advise on that, but that's just the practical barrier that you're going to have to overcome. And I think it can be a really powerful approach, though, if you do manage to do that. So all the best.
Definitely, and you might be able to talk about that later at the bar as well. If there's maybe others who have some advice or countries here who would like to be involved, then Jan Juffermans is right there. Thank you so much. Best of luck. Question number 2, please.
Oopsie.
Cheers.
Hi, I'm Jessica and I work for Sustainalytics, and I analyse publicly listed companies, mainly agricultural and food companies, on how sustainable they are. And lots of them have environmental policies and commitments for 2020, 2030. And I've also seen a lot of companies not hit those commitments that they previously made. And I'm wondering, legally, do you have a good case against a company that's made such a formal commitment?
To any of these experts? To any of them?
Yeah, anyone. Yeah.
Okay, anyone.
I'm sorry, that's a really tough question, so I wouldn't be able to answer this here on the table. No.
I like that we have tough questions. This is not an easy crowd. It's good.
I think all I can offer is to say that, as a principle, it's really helpful to use your target's commitments against themselves in this kind of litigation context. So it's a good way of approaching it, but I think it's difficult to advise on specifics in this moment. But I think you're looking at it the right way to try and use companies' commitments as a standard against themselves.
Do you know of any examples, possibly? No?
Yes, I mean, there are some examples about advertisement first. That's the first thing I would say, because many companies, actually, in the developed world, Occidental world at least, made some advertisement pretending they were good for climate and they were attacked on this. So that's not exactly the commitments, but still. And now we have with the Shell and Milieudefensie, but also with the Total case that we bear, and Sébastien and Paul are here in the crowd as well in France with Notre Affaire à tous and 15 cities, to tell them you have a duty of care. So it's not their own commitments really, but it's to say if you have a duty of care, especially towards human rights, then you need to be in the Paris Agreement's trajectories. So we're pursuing them now. We're suing them now for them to respect this. And of course, when they have commitments, what they put on their website when they say we're the champions of climate and stuff, that we can use to say, hey, you've made commitments, you've said some stuff, and you're actually not doing the same thing at all.
Yeah.
And we hope that it will get accepted by the court and that we will win on those. And we also hope that the duty of care law that is in France, or principle that is in the Netherlands, will also spread out throughout the world, beginning by the EU, so that we can use that with all the companies that are polluting the planet.
Yeah, thank you so much. I see Roda Verheijen also nodding and putting your thumbs up. That's good. Yes, let's do it. Question number 3.
Good night. My name is Amelia Mardas, and I'm from France. I'm a master's student in law and politics of international security. And I had a question regarding the Urgenda case, because about 2 weeks ago in my class of international public law, we studied this case. So it's really interesting for me to meet you. So I had a question, and there was quite a debate within the students of my class. If you're not afraid that this kind of case might discourage governmental efforts in lowering their targets, because they are afraid they won't be able to meet with their promises. And I wanted to know, because it was quite a debate and we haven't really concluded on anything, so I will report to my class on Friday.
Do it. Very good. They'll be very impressed with that, I think. That's very interesting.
No, sorry, I just cut the word from Dennis because it's Dennis who answered, but just to tell you that now the climate litigation things, Notre Affaire à tous, but Urgenda and everyone, is at the examinations in a lot of public classes, but also the examinations to become a lawyer in France and to enter the ENA, École Nationale d'Administration, that is the highest school in France. So we've at least managed to be imposed to the elite that is ruling the country, so it's quite good.
That's amazing. Yes.
I'll say 2 things about that. The first is a discussion that took place in court, at the court of first instance. The state actually said, if you rule against us, that will be bad for our negotiating position. And the court has a very simple answer to that. If they say, if that negotiating position is unlawful, it's not for yours to negotiate. You can't negotiate something that is unlawful, right? So that's the starting point. The second thing is, yes, in this case, we used a specific target that was recognized. And that helped, but it wasn't the only bit on which we based the case. It was much broader on the fact that there was a positive duty and that these admissions of the fact that this is what they needed to do was just a hook that we could use as sort of a factual rock bottom. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that emissions are still rising. The carbon budget, the total amount of emissions that we can emit, is shrinking, has been shrinking even since this case. So the factual case to say what you're doing is really below the rock bottom, the evidence is growing, unfortunately. So it wasn't just this bit. So that's not entirely, I now realize, an answer to your question. But I think the answer then is, first of all, we as a community need to push our governments to do much more. If they are deterred by these types of litigation, then that, I believe, will not be a deterrent for a court to establish the duty and establish the fact that they need to be acting.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and say hi to your class, I'd say. Let's talk about the future, shall we? Because what do you expect? Where will climate litigation go? Will we start suing individuals, or will it be redundant because finally governments and companies are, going to be taking their responsibility? Will there only be more cases, or will there be lots more individual personal actions such as blocking roads and those kinds of activities that we see in the UK, for instance, because it's not going fast enough? Where are we going with this?
I do think that the Extinction Rebellion, for instance, what is happening in the UK, that is increasing, and that will also be an increasing part of what climate litigation is about, is that what can you do in the face of a calamity? There was a very recent case in France where someone, I believe, stole a portrait of Macron, of the president, and the court actually said this was a lawful act of civil disobedience.
Nice. We'll also have a big Extinction Rebellion activity here on October 7th.
Right.
For those who are interested.
So that's one area where we'll need more lawyers. We actually need, you need a lot of lawyers to protect these people that are doing the things that unfortunately need to be happening to push the system. And as long on the state side and on the corporate side, as long as things are not going to change and change fast, you'll get more cases. And I also tell you, most of these cases are going to be lost.
Why do you say that?
Well, because this is not an easy thing that we're doing, right? We are very fortunate that we won in the first instance. That was partly because of hard work and because we had the right judges. We had a very courageous panel of 3 judges. And you're not always going to meet the right judge. And you're not always going to hit the nail on the head. But the underlying principles behind these cases are just common sense. Because it makes absolutely, utterly no sense that it's up for politics to decide to completely destroy the planet and for us to not even be able to live on it anymore and not to entertain all the rights that we've been building for 60 years. So the cases make so much logical sense in their core that in the end, I'm also convinced that this will be sort of, what I personally hope is that in 10 years there will be a new consciousness that if as a state you're not doing what you should be doing, that you're going to be held liable in court. That is just a given. Yeah. And that's what I think part of the future of climate litigation is going to be about. Yeah.
Thank you. How about you?
So, I think I see in the near to medium future increasing focus on this rights lens for climate litigation. So both the sort of traditional human rights and the expansion of those and our understanding of things like the right to life and the right to culture, but also looking at the kind of innovative approaches that Delphine talked about giving rights to nature and revisiting the fundamental basis of our legal system in that way. I think also practically we're going to see down the line more of a focus on the kinds of impacts of the climate solutions that a lot of people talk about. So it might be something like bioenergy and carbon capture and storage and the kind of right to food and right to water impacts that kind of technology and approach might have as well. So it's going to get increasingly focused on the sort of the concrete impacts of this transition that we're going to be living through.
Thank you.
I would say three things. First, we have to make the polluters pay. And when I look at what's happening to Monsanto Bayer, who lost a lot of money because the victims, unfortunately, but kicked them out, I believe that we can really give a huge pain to those who are destroying our planet. So the first thing would be let's make them pay. The second thing I would like to say more largely, it's get involved. I mean, because we have the marches, we have the civil disobedience thing, we have the climate litigation, but we also have a lot of students from big schools who are saying we won't go to work for the polluters. We have a lot of people like Denis, but also like this guy who resigned from HSBC this summer, saying this goes in the wrong sense, that are resigning from the polluting system, and we can all get engaged, get involved in our own way. We can all find the resources to do something, and we really need to act because they don't. So if we don't, they won't. And then when we launched L'Affaire du siècle, climate litigation, planet litigation was our reason to be of Notre Affaire à tous. This is why we funded it. But when Greenpeace, Oxfam, and Life NH joined us, they said, okay, we lobbied, we demonstrated, and so what? Nothing's changing. So we are tired of it. So let's go to court, and we went there for this reason. But I would say also, and this is my other aim in my life, my other job, we also need to change the rules. And to change the rules, we need to write the rules. So we also need to vote and to write the laws that rule the world if you want to save it.
Let's do it. Feels like something, yes. Yes, thank you very much. Very good, thank you. So the climate litigation movement is growing rapidly. We said that before already. It's been established again by Dennis just now. What can it do and what can we do for it to become more effective, for it to be better, to even win more cases? How can climate litigation and all the cases and all the work we do legally improve? How can it become even better? How can we become smarter? How can we win more?
Well, I think it's really important for lawyers to really think hard about how their legal actions are sort of having an effect in wider society. So it's about trying to communicate to the public, why this legal action matters, but also, what status the law has within our social set of rules and why it has a privileged status, and to explain its function, as Dennis was saying, about setting the limits, the rock bottom, and to explain the context of what we're doing. It's not providing the full solution; it's providing the kind of the frame within which we can find the political solutions.
Yeah, I think what's very important for the whole climate litigation movement, and also what you see in a lot of the cases that we know in France and in the US, etc., it's not just a small group of people going to court, but it's really a broader movement that makes politicians be able not to escape it, that makes sure that the court can't get away with a lame judgment, but also that really makes the media also pay attention. These court cases, they're not just a way, they're also a way to actually educate the media. Because for the first time they hear their own government say in court, usually, yes, we know we're not doing enough, which is quite shocking.
Yes.
Right? And why is that happening in court and not in Parliament? Because in Parliament, you don't like to say that you're not doing enough. And in Parliament, if you say, yeah, we're doing plenty, then there's no one that can hold you to the truth. But if you're in court, you have to substantiate what you're doing. And when the papers are presented to the court saying, listen, this is what you said you should be doing, this is what you're actually doing, why is that? Why are you retracting what you used to have this target, now you have a lower target? Where is your scientific substantiation that we can still do it, what you're saying, we can still be achieve the 2 degree or 1.5 degree target? And they can't substantiate that. That really exposes the emptiness in a lot of the promises. So it's and that's hard on politics, and it helps the cases itself help to also for the media to tell that story and to know to have a platform and to educate them about the fact that this is what is actually happening.
We need as much revealing of the truth as possible through your amazing work. Marie Toussaint, Sam Hunter-Jones and Dennis van Berkel, thank you so much. Thank you so much. You can go. Thank you so much. Thank you. So this is what's happening in Europe, but what is happening all over the world. From, let's say, of the roughly 1,000 cases that are being filed, only about 100 of these take place outside of richer countries, such as the United States and this continent. Only 100, so that's a vast disbalance. In a separate meeting during this morning and this afternoon, experts from all over the world who are involved in legal climate work came together here in Amsterdam to exchange practices. So who was there today? Who had the meeting today to sort of work together? And wow, that must have been very inspiring. We've asked 2 representatives to share with us their experiences and also what we can do to support their struggle. Rizwana Hassan and Joan Akiza, where are you? Oh, there you are. Good. Let me take a microphone so people can actually hear you. Can I have a big round of applause? Can I ask you to stand up, please? Can you stand up for me?
Yeah.
Can everyone see them? It's a bit dark. Maybe stand a bit more. Joan, do you want to join me? Can you both please introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name is Rizwana. I'm from Bangladesh. Good that she has made me walk over here because I was about to doze off. I've got a 5 hours time difference and it's time for me to really go for sleep, and it's midnight for me.
Only 10 more minutes, you can do it.
We'll survive.
You will. Thank you so much. Joan, how about you?
I also have the same issue with like her. So
I'm so glad you're still awake.
Yeah. My name is Joan Akiza. I'm from Uganda, also known as Friends of the Earth Uganda. Nappy.
Nappy.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the climate crisis. That will sort of wake you up, I think, right? How is the climate crisis affecting Bangladesh in your
it's
case?
affecting us very badly. Bangladesh is one of the 50 countries that will be very seriously affected by climate change. 1/3 of the country is just 1 meter higher than the sea level. So if the sea level rises by 1 meter,
yes,
we lose 1/3 of our landmass. And losing 1/3 of our landmass means a lot because Bangladesh is the 8th most populated country of the world.
Wow.
So we'll be competing with the very scarce land resource that we have. We are number 2 in terms of exposure to flood, and we are number 6 in terms of exposure to cyclone.
Wow.
So that if climate change happens the way it is being predicted, it will be devastating for Bangladesh.
Yes. That sounds, that's very intense. I'm going to stand here because I feel I'm blocking you for many people. Look, that's a lot better. Hello. How about Uganda?
Yeah, Uganda, we are also experiencing the same climate change challenges, especially in areas where there are oil and gas explorations taking place, with a specific reference to Total as the company that is taking lead.
Total, the company?
Yes. Yeah. So there are many issues that are happening, considering that the activities are ongoing in a critically biodiversity area that is full of national parks, rivers, lakes, and sensitively ecological sites. So the devastation of the environment is at risk as as a result of those activities, but also there are issues of land grabbing, there are issues of inadequate compensations, there are issues of lack of participation of adequate participation of local communities into the entire processes, but also there are issues that have to relate with drought and famine. And so we have seen the different changes that are happening within the climate. And yet Uganda is one of the largest agriculture leading producing countries, and communities highly depend on agriculture. So with the impact of climate change, it is affecting the livelihoods of communities, but also affecting women's rights to a larger extent.
Yes. Are the both of you preparing any climate or environmental cases at the moment?
Bangladesh is not responsible for the problem. It's not that we are emitting greenhouse gases for which climate change is taking place. So our litigation is not concentrating on mitigation efforts of the government or lack of mitigation efforts by the government. But of course, we are challenging the development paradigms. It's the same faulty, exploitative Western development paradigm that the country is following. Bangladesh has one coal-based power plant. It's now moving from 1 to 18 because countries that are saying that they will not be going for new coal-based power plants are actually shifting their plans to our part of the world because we don't have a legally binding mitigation target for the country. So we will not be fighting against the coal-based power plants because they'll be aggravating the mitigation problem, but it's a wrong development notion. It's exploitative, it's not good for the world. So we'll be attacking those. We are already in the campaign phase and we'll probably be developing litigation in due course of time. But our effort is more concentrating on the adaptation measures that are being taken by the government, how effective they are. The government is increasingly going for deforestation, so using more and more forest land for industrialization purpose and purposes that are not related to afforestation or forest conservation. So we are challenging those initiatives of the government because with less and less coastal forest, more and more coastal people will be exposed to flooding and cyclone. So we'll be concentrating, and we are concentrating on the lack of adaptation measures being taken by the government. And the government is also not protecting the very little agricultural land that we have in the country. And this land feeds 160 million people. Very small patch of land. So if the agricultural land is gone and we don't protect our traditional agricultural practices and we surrender ourselves to industrial agricultural practices, then the adaptation will be faulty and the solution that they're giving us will be false.
Yes. Thank you very much. How about in Uganda? Any cases in development?
Yeah, there is a case that we are developing against Total. We are working together with Friends of the Earth France. And the case is about the French commercial code and the duty of vigilance and how Total has failed to put in place a plan that it is mandated to put in place that sets out the risks and sets out how it is supposed to implement the risks and measures on how to overcome those risks. So we are working on that case. I think today was our last day that we are supposed to receive a response from Total, and we haven't received it. So come November, we'll be taking on the case forward.
Yes.
Yep.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. So generally speaking, climate change is hitting the global south, if you like, hardest. But most climate litigation I've learned about is taking place here, in a more wealthier part of the world. Why? Do you have an idea of why that is?
I think it's because we are first trying to handle the mitigation part of it. We really don't want the temperature to increase, and we really want the emission to be controlled first. That is taken as the core. And I think it's also related to the historical responsibility notion, that it's not us who have done it, and it's still not us who are doing it. No. It's still the Western countries, the industrialized economies. And that is why I think the citizens of these countries feel much more responsible, and they really want to engage with their government so that their government takes the mitigation measures. That's my interpretation. And in our part of the world, it's less, because first of all, it's difficult for us to develop understanding around climate science. People understand changes that are happening, but they don't really call it climate change. A farmer understands the changes, but a farmer does not define it as climate change. So for us to understand the climate science, then internalize it and then go into action is a bit more challenging. That's why it's not a mainstream environmental activism in our part of the world, but it is there. The enlightened community is talking about it. We are connecting with the people, organizing them. And if you notice the climate strike that has taken place, it hasn't only taken place in Europe. Of course, it has taken place here in a much more larger scale, but other countries in the global south have also picked up.
How about you? What do you think about the difference?
I would like to start by saying that it's good the climate cases are starting from Europe, America, because most of these companies that are causing the climate change are originally from Europe and America. So it's good for countries to hold their companies accountable. And in responding to why there is that difference between the global and the south in terms of bringing about these cases, one, I think it is an issue that has not been well appreciated enough. Just like we heard about the professor talking about earth jurisprudence and rivers being able to sue in their own capacity, climate litigation is something that has not yet been well appreciated deep down there at the global south. So I think that is one of the challenges. But secondly, I think also the issues of financing these climate cases is another challenge for the global south. Litigation is viewed as a very expensive venture and time-consuming. Takes a number of years before someone can get a remedy out of court. So that as well is a limiting factor for cases coming up.
So what could we do to address this balance, if you like?
I would think there could, if there would be chances of capacity building on climate litigation in areas of the south, and also if there could be some funding that would extend to the south in terms of climate litigation to create more awareness about this whole program and how it benefits people and how it benefits communities that would be facing challenges as a result of climate change impacts, it would be really great.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. Do you think the amount of cases will grow, that that's a possibility?
I am not actually dying to see that the amount of cases grow in the global south, because it's very important that we identify the actors and the players behind the crisis and we hook them. So my country doesn't have the jurisdiction to go against a US company or a Japanese company unless that company has a business in my part of the world. And they're actually creating the crisis without having a business in my part of the world. It's their lavish, extravagance lifestyle, rather. So for me, it's important that we collaborate with the European actors. We collaborate with the US NGOs, those who are fighting for climate justice, and our voices are represented in the cases that are being filed by the global north. That's much more important. To me, it's not important that I file a case in my jurisdiction and please tell the Europeans and the Americans not to emit anymore. That will not have any consequence. Rather, if I work with like-minded NGOs and build up the global crisis and fight the cases not as an European NGO, but as a European NGO that has connection with the global south and bringing the voices of the global south, that are being affected because of the irresponsible behavior of the governments or the corporations.
Yes.
That is what I'm looking forward to. So more collaboration between the northern NGOs and the global NGOs, northern communities and the southern communities.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Let's make that happen. Thank you so much. Rizvina Hazan and Joan Akiza. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, there is a wave of climate cases engulfing the world. They're very diverse, sometimes started by families, by NGOs or by shareholders, and filed against companies, governments or investors. There are clearly different ways to take justice into our own hands, and all have their different merits. We need all of them. Our rights are massively impacted by climate change. Right, massively impacted, and in the face, let's say, of lack of action against, lack of action actually of governments and companies, we can take justice and we can stand up to offend ourselves and also to defend nature through court. And that can be profoundly successful, as we've learned tonight, which has been very, very inspiring. There's someone waving a hand at the back for quite a while. I'm sort of ending this, but I don't want you to sort of, keep hanging there. You can ask a question, and it can take 10 seconds, but that's about it.
Okay. So I'm a climate scientist that has been working on the duty of countries in reducing emissions based on individual rights.
Could you tell us your name, please?
My name is Yann Robier-Dupont. My question is simple. As a citizen from the global north with a large carbon footprint, can I sue myself?
Who would you like to ask that question to?
Everyone here.
Everyone here.
The
so
idea
what do people
underlying
think?
this
Can he
is
sue
to
himself?
not just put the responsibility on politics, but
Yes.
also bring the debate on the responsibility of everyone.
Of ourselves as people. Thank you so much. Who would feel that, yes, that is a good idea and that is something that we should do? That's not too many people. There's at least one. Yes. Oh, there's one there. Sorry. Yes, that's great. Yeah, you can... Right, yeah, could you just please... Sorry. No, we're going to get you a microphone.
I think that's a very good question, and that is also something that we're, at least in academia, thinking about. Because what people often overlook is that we have the issue of human rights, but human rights don't come without human obligations. And that field of human obligations is actually something that we're developing now. So indeed, what are our responsibilities as individuals towards each other, as a community, and maybe towards people across the globe.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. And thank you for that addition. One of the most important things I think that we've learned today is that we need everyone to be involved, and also that climate litigation is not, let's say, the only route, right? It's one of the ways that we have to tackle climate change, but we need various routes to create real impact, and we need everyone to be involved. Also personally, in the way you vote, and also maybe in the way you sue yourself, in the way that you hold yourself responsible, because we are, of course. I mean, we made this world, so we can also change it, right? Who else? I would say. In the meantime, we also need to be, I think, very aware, though, of the fact that there is a major disbalance still between the amount of and the possibilities for climate cases globally. And we need to do what we can to address this, and need to really, I think, as you also, I think, so very importantly stated, work together in this and do this as a global team. Thanks so much to all our expert speakers for your inspiration and your wisdom. Can I have one round of applause, please, for our amazing guests? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Also, many thanks to tonight's organizers, Laurie van den Burg and Nina de Pater of Milieudefensie. And also, yes, you can do it right away. Just do it. And Julia Mulder and Barbara Vos of Pakhuis de Zwijger. But yes, no, do it. Yes, more. They certainly all deserve it very much. Thank you so much also for being here tonight or watching via the live stream. Yes, thank you so much. And for your commitment and support, because we're all in this together, right? And United, we have the power to make justice happen. I'm convinced of that. Now, Pakhuis de Zwijger has some relevant upcoming events planned that might be of interest to you. On September 30th, we have Shareholder Earth. Also, we have on October 9th, I think, yes, a meetup in the case against Shell. And then on October 10th, a festival to celebrate newspaper Trouw's Sustainable Top 100, where you might also catch me on stage again, if you like. Time to continue this conversation and maybe even some strategic planning, I hope, at the bar. Thank you very much and have a great evening. Thank you very much.